A man who hosted the infamous white parties, exclusive events where everything looked like luxury, excess, and total chaos. Parties that, according to multiple allegations, were hiding something much darker. The so-called freak-offs, private gatherings where people speak of manipulation, substances, and situations that are hard to explain. A man who maintained an unusually close relationship with a young Justin Bieber, who reportedly spent 48 hours at his mansion in a dynamic many now find unsettling. A music mogul who built a multi-million-dollar empire while becoming one of the most powerful figures in the industry. A man who was arrested after a nightclub shooting in New York alongside his then-partner Jennifer Lopez. Security footage that appears to show him violently assaulting his partner, Cassie Ventura, inside a hotel. A figure who, for years, was seen as untouchable, but also an artist at the center of a feud that ended with the deaths of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. A businessman who built power for decades, while his name began surfacing in allegations from over 100 individuals accusing him of abuse, sex trafficking, and exploitation. A rapper whose mansions were raided by federal authorities as part of a wide-reaching investigation. In 2024, he was arrested and formally charged with serious crimes. For years, no one spoke, no one asked, no one stopped him, because the story of P. Diddy doesn't begin with his downfall. It begins long before that. It begins at the height of his power, when no one dared to question him. This is Behind the Icon, and this is the story of Sean Diddy Combs. There was something that, for years, was part of his public image, and almost no one questioned it. The famous white parties, exclusive events, guests dressed entirely in white, celebrities, business figures, people with real power, some of the biggest names in Hollywood, recognized all over the world. From the outside, these parties were a symbol of luxury, excess, and status, the place you had to be. But according to multiple allegations, that was only the surface. Because behind those parties, other stories begin to emerge, more closed, more private, much harder to see. The so-called freak-offs, gatherings where, according to the accusations, the rules changed, controlled environments, substances like ketamine and ecstasy, and dynamics that, over time, start to reveal patterns of manipulation and exploitation, accounts that align. People who don't know each other, yet describe the same things, the same dynamics, the same patterns, the same details. For years, all of that stayed out of the public eye. Because what people saw was something else. Luxury, fame, power. But as the allegations begin to pile up, that image starts to break. And what once looked like part of the spectacle begins to reveal something completely different. But the most unsettling part is that many of the things surrounding him today didn't start now. They started when no one was paying attention, before the parties, before the allegations, and before he became one of the most powerful names in music. Sean Combs was completely unknown. He was born in New York, in an environment with no obvious privileges, no clear connections to power. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't an heir. He wasn't someone who, at first glance, seemed destined to dominate the industry. But even in those early years, there was something that didn't quite add up. A different kind of ambition, more intense, more calculated. He started from the bottom, watching, learning, understanding how relationships worked, how money moved, and how power was built. And very quickly, he began to move. Contacts, opportunities, decisions, until he was no longer invisible, and started getting closer to the center of it all. But there are three moments that show something was already there from the very beginning. First, the way he moved in the industry. He didn't wait for opportunities. He forced them. He walked into meetings he wasn't invited to, and stayed until someone listened. Second, his relationship with power. He didn't just want to work with artists. He wanted to control them, their sound, their image, their careers. Third, his obsession with status. From the start, success wasn't enough. He wanted to be on top, visible, untouchable. And over time, that stopped being ambition. and started becoming something else. And when he finally enters the industry, he doesn't do it alone. He connects with someone who would change everything. The notorious B.I.G., a different kind of talent, a powerful presence, and the artist who would define an era. The relationship grows quickly, trust, business, and a full commitment. But as his power grew, so did the tension. Two sides began to form, the East Coast versus the West Coast. New York, with the notorious B.I.G., and the circle around Sean Diddy Combs, luxury, business, and control. On the other side, Los Angeles, with Tupac Shakur, and a scene rooted in the streets, violence, and direct confrontation. At first, it was just a rivalry in music, sales, success, a battle over who would dominate hip-hop. But that didn't last long. The songs changed, the attacks began, and the indirect threats became direct. What once felt like part of the show started to become personal, extremely personal, until something happened that changed everything. In 1994, Tupac was shot multiple times inside a recording studio in New York and survived. But from that moment on, something shifted. He became suspicious, started pointing fingers, and began to believe that, on the East Coast, there was more than just competition. None of that was ever proven. But by then, it was too late. Because from that point on, it was no longer about music. It was becoming real. In the end, it was two different visions, two different styles, and two completely opposite ways of defining success. And this is the moment when the violence becomes real. It stops being part of the narrative and turns into action. September 1996, Las Vegas. Tupac Shakur leaves a boxing match, gets into a car, and at a red light, another vehicle pulls up beside him. Multiple shots are fired. Tupac is critically wounded. He's taken to the hospital, and 6 days later, he dies. The impact is immediate. The news spreads worldwide. The industry is in shock, and almost instantly, the suspicions begin. Conflicting stories, finger pointing, names starting to circulate within the industry. Among them, the East Coast Circle. And even Sean Diddy Combs himself is specifically mentioned. None of this was ever proven. There was never any official confirmation. But the doubts never went away. And the worst part is, the tension doesn't disappear. 6 months later, March 1997, Los Angeles. The notorious B.I.G. leaves an event, gets into his SUV, stops at a red light, and then another car pulls up. More shots. Biggie is hit multiple times. He's taken to the hospital, and once again, another life is lost. 2 cities, 2 shootings. 2 of the biggest figures in hip-hop murdered, and neither case ever solved. From that moment on, it was no longer about music. It had become something much darker. And after that, nothing was ever the same. Despite everything, Sean Combs keeps rising. More money, more influence, more visibility. He becomes a central figure. Events, business deals, connections. And in that moment, Jennifer Lopez enters the picture. They become one of the most talked about couples of the time. But then, something unexpected happens. Inside a nightclub in New York, an argument breaks out, a fight, and suddenly, gunshots. 3 people are injured. Chaos takes over. Diddy is arrested. Jennifer Lopez is also taken into custody. The story explodes. Headlines, media coverage, total exposure. And eventually, he's cleared of some charges. But for the first time, something shifts. His image begins to crack. But there are 3 things that explain why all of this was able to go on for so long. First, the level of power. He wasn't an isolated figure. He was surrounded by celebrities, business leaders, and influential people. People with a lot to lose. Second, access. Getting into that circle wasn't easy. And once you were inside, getting out wasn't either. Third, the cost of speaking out. Because going up against someone with that level of influence was never a simple choice. And for years, that was enough to keep everything exactly as it was. But what starts to emerge after that changes everything that came before. The case of Cassie Ventura, a relationship that lasted for years, public, visible, and already part of his image. But behind that exposure, there was another story, much quieter, much harder to see. For years, Cassie was part of his inner circle, trips, events, public appearances, always there. But over time, a different narrative begins to surface. Accounts that speak of control, manipulation, and dynamics that didn't quite add up, until something appears that changes everything. A 2016 security video inside a hotel. The footage is clear. He's seen chasing her, hitting her, dragging her across the floor. No context, no editing, no interpretation. For years, that video had no public consequences. It stayed out of the conversation, like so many other things, until it finally surfaces. And in that moment, there's no more room for doubt. Because what were once just accounts now have images. What were once just stories are now evidence. And from that point on, everything starts to change. Lawsuits, testimonies, accusations begin to pile up, and a story that, for the first time, can no longer be controlled. And in 2024, everything accelerates. What for years had been rumors, claims, and isolated allegations starts to take on a different scale. It's no longer just about testimonies. It becomes a federal investigation, search warrants, agents entering his mansions in Los Angeles and Miami, luxury properties turned into investigation scenes, documents, devices, evidence. Everything begins to be examined. The case escalates from media coverage to the courts, from allegations to formal charges. And then it finally happens. The arrest in New York City. Sean Diddy Combs is taken into custody and charged with serious crimes. The man who, for decades, moved freely, surrounded by power, and protected by his influence, no longer is. Because this time, it's not about reputation, it's about justice. Sean Diddy Combs was many things: a producer, a businessman, an icon, but also the center of a story that, for years, no one wanted to look at too closely. Because the real question isn't how much power he had, it's how long he held it, without anyone daring to question him. Because when no one asks, anything becomes possible. This was Behind the Icon, and this was the story of P. Diddy Combs. If you're interested in stories like this, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments which case you'd like us to cover next. Because in Behind the Icon, behind every figure, there's always something more.